I have the distinct honor of introducing some pretty amazing people working in health and Indigenous health who bring incredible wealth of knowledge and experience. So really, this is our master class in Indigenous health. You will probably never have this level of information from some pretty amazing people. So I want to introduce Alika LaFontaine. Dr. Alika LaFontaine is grounded mixed Indigenous ancestry from Métis, Oji-Cree, and Pacific Islander. He's award-winning physician, social innovator, past president of the Canadian Medical Association, and led their internal reconciliation process and apology. It's been so helpful, Alika, in supporting CFNU working towards their apology. Thank you. I want to introduce Dawn Gugu, who is Mi'kmaq, registered nurse in her home community, oh my God, Waigoma. Waigoma First Nation, a small Mi'kmaq community in Cape Breton, who's also a veteran. So she has some great stories. I have the distinct honor of recognizing and acknowledging and looking forward to hearing from Carrie Nuki from New Zealand Nurses Association. Who's Maui? Along with the president of their union, they have joint leadership responsibilities. Raised in Nakia Carey is of Nagati. Naki? You're gonna have to tell me. Nagati Kaguguna. Nagati Kaguguna. C'est bon? No. And she's going to have to introduce herself.
Politely.
Finally, can I introduce Candy D'Souza, who is Lahitene from ancestral roots in the Lanza Junction, the Chaco and Fraser Rivers. Is there wildfires around? Not right now. That's good. She's a nurse and proud to represent members of the Okanagan-Similkameen region for the BC Nurses Union. Thank you, panelists. Are we going in order?
Yeah, start with Dawn. Yeah, Dawn first.
So each of these leaders has so much to offer, and we are going to be limited for time. So they're going to start by sharing a piece, what they feel that would be important for you to know on this very important today. And Dawn is going to start. I welcome Dawn.
So Alika told me I would need to stand up so I could see my slides. I cannot see my slides. Oh, there's a little box.
I'll share. I'll share.
There I am. Hello. Koi everyone. Deduisida na Wedebexi Wego ma. Well, all y'all, thank you for the welcome to these lands. I've been given the honor to share the collective work of Indigenous nurses and allies, and I hope to inspire you all to know and do more. And I also want to give a shout out to Laquia Wozni, who is the writer of this report, but working with the other chairs. We recognize that these territories are and always will be Indigenous lands. We are guests and descendants with inherent responsibilities to the future generations. We commit to stepping forward and stewarding the water, the air, the fire, the land with respect, gratitude, and care. We pledge service to our local Indigenous people as good neighbors and allies. We express our gratitude to the Canadian Federation Nurses Union for their financial contributions towards developing this discussion paper, Beyond Equity. We also acknowledge the funding for the Indigenous Nursing Research Chairs provided by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Institutes of Indigenous Peoples' Health, with additional support from professional nursing organizations in our respective regions. The legacy of colonialism continues to have significant impacts on how healthcare is provided on the health experiences and outcomes of First Nation, Métis, and Innu people. Beyond Equity takes a closer look at what a distinct based approach means for healthcare. providers, and how it impacts Indigenous peoples' experiences and outcomes. We introduce key historical factors that have contributed to Indigenous-specific racism in healthcare while upholding the unique rights, identities, and health needs of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. We offer ideas for nurses to become culturally safe providers. The 6 I-chairs, coast to coast, have a collective journey and objective. They share individual and collective experiences in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People by advancing Indigenous health nursing, working towards equitable health system, by supporting Indigenous and non-Indigenous nurses to undertake research that aims to understand social, economical, cultural determinants of health. This includes looking back, looking at the now, and looking forward. These I-chairs have gone and beyond to help guide me and a lot of other Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. So I just want to take a quick look. We have Lisa Bork-Bearskin, who asked me to be here today from BC, Holly Graham, who's in Saskatchewan, Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck, who's in Manitoba, Dr. Latimer, who I work with in Nova Scotia, Dr. Emily Gagnon, I never say it right, she's in Quebec, and then Dr. Jason Hickey, who is in New Brunswick. So, over the past 50 years, our early nursing leaders paved the way with their unique ways of being, their distinct knowledge, and their ability to accept and respond to their lived realities. Over 45 years, Indigenous nurse leaders who formed the Canadian Indigenous Nursing Association in 1975 have been at the forefront of advancing Indigenous health nursing, the first Indigenous health organization at the time. Trailblazers such as Edith Montour and Jean Goodwill were among the first recognized Indigenous nurse leaders in Canada. Through leadership, presence, we are strengthening nursing profession that is committed to reconciliation. We continue to show the power of how collaboration can create meaningful solutions. With bravery, courage, trust, curiosity, we bring together the different perspectives to build inclusive, value-based partnerships, sustainable solutions. These are only some of our brave leaders. We honor our grandmothers, old ones, healers, helpers, and health professionals. We are stronger together. Continuing the tradition of bravery and advocacy in advanced practice nursing, our approach to health is infused with First Nation, Métis, Inuit values, language, and laws of relationality. We look beyond traditional models to embrace a holistic wellness vision. We teach and practice person-centered, community-focused, and community-led care. We are grateful to our future leaders who have contributed to this collective work. So here, these are some of the students that have worked with the chairs across Canada. Looking ahead, we need to end denialism. Decades of advocacy have not ended these barriers. Tokenism, white supremacy, and institutional resistance keep Indigenous nurses and patients at risk of being dismissed, devalued, or excluded. We also need to stand together and recognize Indigenous leaders. Charlotte Edith Anderson Montour, a Mohawk from Six Nations, was barred from Canada's nursing schools. She trained in the US. She became the first registered Indigenous nurse and served in the First World War. April 10, her birthday, honors her legacy as Indigenous Nurses Day. It is time to make our presence visible, recognized, and valued in the future of nursing in Canada. We remember truth. This truth is now undeniable, and it demands justice and change. Only by confronting these truths head-on can we begin to change a system that remains broken and silent until we call it out. We witness harmful encounters. Let this be our call to listen, learn, and act so Indigenous people can access safe, dignified, and equitable care. We experience blatant, systemic racism compounded by health disparities. Colonialism still severs our ties to land, language, and self-determination. Our rights to healing will be seen and known. Indigenous nursing truths. So they're listed there for you to read. I don't want to turn around, I can't see over here. But we are ready to move from awareness to action. Nothing about us without us. I also want to add with us. This work is for all. Cultural resurgence will not be an invisible labor nor a checklist. Reconciliation is lived daily. Beyond equity takes action to addressing Indigenous-specific racism. Key strategies are shared, such as practical steps for everyday practice, actionable frameworks, accountability, Indigenous and community-led solutions. So today I'm sharing an example of an Indigenous-led solution that was successful through the Indigenous Ulnu Nursing Initiative. And Ulnu means Indigenous in the Mi'kmaq language, and that's what we are going to call it in Nova Scotia. Mi'kmaq is now an official language, and we are taking back our language. Thank you. I'm almost done. Dr. Latimer and our small team gained funding through partnerships and proposals to create the Office of Ulnu Nursing in Inamagi, Nova Scotia. In 2024, the office was established under Dajigimic. This office is operated, managed by the Mi'kmaq people. The aim is to create a sustainable, supportive, and safe environment in nursing schools across Nova Scotia for Mi'kmaq and Indigenous nursing students. Led by a Mi'kmaq nurse, Julie Francis, from Eskasoni First Nation, and has the capacity for 4 Mi'kmaq Indigenous nurse education specialists, and one is here today, who are available to Indigenous students across all nursing schools in Nova Scotia. I also do have a website. It's called Ulnu Nursing. It's just ulnunursing.ca, and it shares this journey of how the office had come to be. Also celebrates Mi'kmaq nurses from our 13 communities who are often not seen. Final thoughts. We lift each other up with collective work. And now Lisa has asked me to represent this work, but also had asked me to invite you all to our 3rd Indigenous Nursing Research for Health Equity Summit in Vancouver, BC, the homelands of the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam and Squamish people. And I have a video that has the invite. Oh, I kept going, I'm sorry. Walalio.
Bon après-midi. I'm Malik LaFontaine. I'm an anesthesiologist who lives in northern Alberta. I think some of my colleagues are here from Grand Prairie Regional Hospital. So I just want to extend just gratitude to all the organizers for today, as well as Linda, whether or not it's meeting with premiers or with 1,200 nursing colleagues from across the country. She always gives me the best invitations. There's two things that I know for sure about nurses. The first is, as a doctor, I never give nurses advice, I give them suggestions. So please take anything I say today as suggestions. The second is that if a physician takes 2 years to do something, it'll take a nurse half the time. So I'm not surprised that you guys are here. I've been leading and following in healthcare change for about 20 years, and what I'd like to do today is to show a bit about what I've learned over the years that might help you as you think through what goes on in what comes after these apologies. So I was president of the CMA back in 2022, had a lot of interactions with nurses across the country, including leaders like Linda. It was a great opportunity for me to see change happen in real life. Before the CMA, I participated in something called the Indigenous Health Alliance. It was a project that I led with First Nations across the country from 2013 to 2018. At its peak, it had 150 First Nations. It was actually the largest health transformation initiative in Canadian history at the time. And with those traditional territories, we moved forward, planned to bring in patient-centered care, patient safety, quality improvement into Indigenous health. And at the time, Indigenous Services Canada wasn't around. We did not have a chief nursing officer, which would have really helped at the time. And so that experience helped me to recognize kind of how change happens as you move towards big investments like the $68 million in funding we were able to raise. With the CMA apology, I continued to learn and observe change as the person within the CMA that actually led the apology process. For the folks who were on the Indigenous Advisory Committee, I don't understand exactly what you went through, but I think I went through some similar things with the work that we did with the CMA. When we were moving forward with the idea of an apology, it transitioned from this idea of, a short apology of just a few words to kind of a larger event where people would have the opportunity to kind of engage in the different feelings and movements that happen when you go through these sorts of processes. And I'm not surprised that you guys found yourselves to the same place. With the CMA apology, there was really three distinct phases. There's kind of the pre-apology phase where you're trying to lay roots as far as what the apology would be. The apology itself, which all of us are going to get to experience together, and thank you again for the invitation to be a part of this. And finally, the action that comes after. And the action is actually the most important part of any change that occurs, whether or not it's with anti-Indigenous racism or the other big changes that we need to have in the healthcare system. So change follows patterns. And I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to talk about one of the big patterns that I've seen over the time that I've been a part of change. So this diagram here is called the social dynamics of change, and I'm going to throw on some labels here. If you look at the X and Y axes where they intersect kind of at your baseline, it's kind of the baseline where change starts. When change happens, there's people who want to hold on to the way that things are and people that want to let go. And when you have change move through a system, it's like a fight back and forth between energy to move and change and energy to hold on to the ways that things have always been done. At the baseline of change is always status quo. And the status quo is the part of change where things feel normal. So if you go into an institution and it just feels comfortable or kind of average, that's your status quo. Your status quos don't necessarily have to be good, right? I've worked in a lot of different places across Canada, and there are ORs where I walk in where the norm is hostility. There's other ORs that I've walked into where the norm is collegiality. And so whatever that baseline is, the expectation that you have day after day of what you're going to expect, that's kind of what your status quo is. Now, at some point, the status quos that we experience are maladaptive for the challenges that we have. And this could be true in a clinical sense. If you have a certain way of communicating within a team and you suddenly have a code blue or some other crisis happen, it becomes very clear very quickly whether or not that status quo is adaptive to the challenge that you have. When we look at things like anti-Indigenous racism, the norm that used to exist in Canada was a variety of different things. You know, Indigenous patients did not care about their health. Indigenous patients were not able to understand what they were going through. Indigenous patients needed paternalistic decisions about their care. It was okay to let an Indigenous patient kind of wait the whole day for them to be seen for care instead of putting them in line the way that everyone else is. Now, those norms are obviously changing, but as we've seen things come into the news and as you've unpacked through the work that's been done at CFNU, the reasons why things need to change, crisis has occurred as a result of changes or norms that were not adapted to the challenges that we were presented with. Now, at the very peak of change is crisis. So you can see kind of the curve kind of goes up from your baseline up to kind of the highest point that it gets during this progression. After you hit a crisis, people start to think, okay, maybe we should let go of the way that things were. Maybe we should actually change the way that we go about doing things. And you start down this gentle slope towards denial. Denial is the space where we intuitively push back. We don't feel like change is right because we haven't done things that way before. You know, this is a common thing that we all experience. Have you ever experienced something at work that you're just saying, this is not a good way of doing this? People are more stressed out than they need to. It's way more complex than it needs to be. And you go talk to administration or your physician colleagues, and in response they say, well, that's how we do it here, right? That's the denial intuitive pushback. Now you can see with the line, it starts to take a very sharp downturn. This is where you encounter resistance. Resistance is when you change from simply thinking about or discussing that things as they are don't really work to the point where you actually start to change. You reorganize where money goes, who you're accountable to, who's kind of in charge, who sits around tables influencing decisions. Now, if you're lucky enough to make it through resistance, you move to exploration, where it's easy to reverse the change. These are when we start to bring in policies and different types of procedures. We're actually probably in the resistance, denial, exploration phase of the apology process here. We're still experiencing that with the CMA. At this point, you're making some progress, but it is possible for you to roll back and go back to the way that things were. And then at the very end, you end up having commitment, where change is hard to reverse. I still remember being a part of bringing in the provincial EMR in Alberta. I remember sitting down with the person who came up from Edmonton to talk us through what was happening, and I was sitting there with them shredding papers. And the papers were the papers that I wrote my vitals on every time that a patient came through the doors. And I had a lot of anxiety because my department had a lot of anxiety. I was facility chief at the time. And I asked them, you know, what's going to happen if the software doesn't work? Which I think is actually a pretty reasonable question. And they were sitting there as they were shredding, and they kind of thought for a moment, and they turned to me and said, I don't know, but you can't use these. And then they got up and left. I was committed at that point, right? There was no way to roll back the way that things now were. And at some point, these status quos reach a point of commitment where you then get to a new status quo. We'll never go back to paper in Alberta when it comes to electronic medical records. And at some point, medical care will not go back to racism. But we're not there yet. When you go through these different parts of social change, one of the things I just want to underline here is that crisis is really the energy that pushes you through the other phases. The only reason why we're here talking about this is because of crises that have happened, because the status quo doesn't work, right? Whether we're talking about Brian Sinclair, or we're talking about Joyce Echaquan, or the hundreds and thousands of other stories across the country that have led us here, it's the crisis that's really pushing us forward. Now, if that crisis is unable to overcome denial and resistance, you end up in kind of this endless cycle of change. And for those of us who've worked with anti-racism over the past few years, we know what this feels like. We know getting to the tip of getting to explore or commit towards change, we roll back into the way that things always are. And I just want to just point out that that is something just to be aware of as you move forward. Apologies are really a promise of change. And this is something that I realized as we went through the work that we did at the CMA. It's something that I recognize as I watch other organizations and groups across the country try and make these same kinds of changes. Real change is a new status quo. It's when you don't go past return back to the denial and resistance that holds us back in the past that we need to move on from. And so for anyone in the room who's kind of at the point and recognize that you're kind of in the denial phase or the resistance phase, I really encourage you to look at the crises happening across the country. Those stories are going to be what really brings into your heart and your mind that change really needs to take root. And I really believe that as we make these changes with anti-racism, we can make a better healthcare system, not only for the patients we serve, but also better working environments where you don't have to be concerned about hostility in a relationship with an Indigenous person who's sitting across from you, where you can feel comfortable kind of opening up and talking to them, and that you can really feel like they trust and care about you. One of the things I've always loved about the nursing profession is the connection that you have with patients. Doctors are trained to be distant and far away. Nurses are trained to be right there sitting with the patient, and I think that's a much better way of providing health care. Thank you very much.
Nā mana, nā reo, nā kārangatanga maha e tumutu nei tēnā koutou katoa. Ko waiau e tuaki nei, ko maunga haruru, ko taki te mutu waka, ko Ngāti Kahanunu te iwi, ko Ngāti Tū te hapu, ko Tangoe o te marae, ko Keri Nuku toko wingoa he kai whakahaere tōputanga tāpuhi kai te aki o Aotearoa. It's a pleasure to be here. My introduction acknowledged the mountain that shadows where my people are from. It acknowledged the waka that brought our people to Aotearoa, New Zealand. It acknowledged the lands, our cultures, and my people. And most importantly, it acknowledged my ancestors who are with me here today. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of these lands, whose shoulders we all stand on today. And as part of that commitment before us, it begs the spirit and our responsibilities to honour the discussions here today and to take action from today. The action and meaningful action around addressing racism within nursing. I want to acknowledge CFNU for inviting me here today, all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and to the Indigenous advisory groups, and to you. Because what today means is it marks the courage for change. If you weren't in this room knowing that racism was going to be discussed, then you weren't in that place of healing, and that place that will help Indigenous spaces. Nurses play an incredibly vital role in the change in the healthcare system. I just want to draw on what's happening back at home in Aotearoa. We have a treaty, the Treaty of Waitangi it's called. It's all about relationships between Indigenous people and the Crown. This was about reciprocity. This was about both having a place to stand in Aotearoa. We committed that the Crown could address and oversee the actions of their settlers, and that Māori would still retain their tino rangatiratanga as First Peoples of this world. Unqualified self-determination. We also said that that would cover and ensure that health and well-being was exercised to its full right. For Māori, health is a taonga, a treasure. So those were important to us. But at the 1840 signing of the treaty, the Crown did, as the Crown continues to do today, is to breach that treaty and annihilate the rights, the pre-existing rights of Indigenous peoples of Aotearoa. Now you might say that's got nothing to do with nursing, but it has everything to do with nursing, because part of our past is about addressing the atrocities of that time. Planning our future is about the action to deliver, to bring about that change. And the future is so that our mokopuna, our grandchildren, do not have to traverse those same pathways in the future. So our laws continue to fail Māori. And I'm not sure if many of you watched the news on the 19th of November last year when the biggest political action of our time happened, when hundreds of thousands of people marched to Parliament because this government, this conservative right-wing government, was hell-bent on destroying the treaty, Te Treaty of Waitangi, the commitment that it had to tangata whenua Māori. And all peoples stood up opposed to that. And our organisation stood up and opposed that. Our organisation continues to stand up. Not only are we a professional union representing 64,000 health practitioners, health professionals throughout the country, affiliated to the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, also the International Council of Nurses, and proudly to the Global Nurses United. But our nurses stood up because everything that happens to Māori is about the eradication of addressing and acknowledging their rights as Indigenous people. That impacts on their health and well-being, therefore impacts on the health that we deliver and the way that we deliver. So we make no excuses. Our action is about taking a stand. Every time the government pushes out policies that are negative and negatively impact on Māori, we are there challenging the Crown. Every time that nurses fight for better pay and working conditions, we're there. We're there in equal measures because it doesn't matter if we're fighting for pay equity or we're fighting for the rights of Indigenous people. Our organisation is prepared to stand up every single time. We don't just come together when it's about pay. We come together when it's about the rights of Indigenous people long past today, because it is that action that will inform the future of our people. It is those stories that are important, that our grandchildren can see how we stood up and we took on this government and we challenged every single time. In 2018, 10 Māori nurses, Indigenous nurses, challenged the Crown and took the Crown to court and said, what you're continuing to do is to breach our rights as Indigenous people. You're continuing to undermine the work that we do. That piece of action led to the health reforms that we're currently dealing with, and our nurses will continue to fight, because what is at the heart of this reconciliation or any action today is to look towards the future of our children. And our children, your children, Indigenous children, all have the right to aspire to be whatever they want to be. To live the life that they choose to live, to be who they want to be. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Candy D'Souza. I have traveled here today from the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia, and I just want to throw some gratitude out into the room for being able to come here to enjoy Niagara District for a week at a time. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what our organizations, our organized labor organizations, can do for the work of Truth and Reconciliation and the ILC members that you likely all have and don't know about. So back in 2006, BCNU, our members started to get active around a necessary response to what they saw as ongoing systemic inequities within the healthcare system and within our union. So the Indigenous members at that time recognizing that they'd been long excluded from conversations that shape health policy and practice within the province and the country, even as those decisions that were being made above our heads directly affected our communities. BCNU established what we called in 2006 the Aboriginal Leadership Circle. This was a space that could challenge systemic racism, advocate for culturally safe care, and ensure that our Indigenous perspectives were centered in the work of the Union. We now call ourselves the Indigenous Leadership Circle. After 8 years of advocacy, the members just decided that sticking along with the times was the way to go. So the intent of the caucus today is to raise our Indigenous members up, to call out the ways colonial structures continue to harm Indigenous peoples in healthcare, and to push for meaningful change. Through that work, the caucus, the ILC Circle, aims to increase Indigenous member participation in the Union, to amplify the Indigenous voice in nursing, and ensure that Indigenous knowledge and ways of healing are respected. That means not just inviting Indigenous input from members when decisions are made, but involving Indigenous members early in conversations at every level in planning, especially when outcomes do impact us as Indigenous individuals and the communities that we serve as nurses. The Circle, the ILC, has advocated publicly within province, all levels of government, all levels of health authority for the last 20 years. And we actually, after the calls, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released their calls. BCNU hosted their first Human Rights and Equity Conference focusing on Indigenous sovereignty. That's a conference that's repeated on a regular basis. And I would encourage and call upon all the organizations across the country to consider hosting your own conference for your nurses in the front line on Indigenous sovereignty. Let's see. Since we hosted the first conference, moving up to today, the Indigenous Leadership Circle has continued to make significant strides in advocating for Indigenous rights. BCNU commits the funding, commits the time, commits the structure and the resources to ensuring that the work gets done, that the conversations occur. We lobby government, provincially and federally. We march in the streets to recognize our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We've taken action such as installing a memorial stone in our own gardens at the BCNU headquarters in recognition of the children that never came home from residential school. And so I just wanted to say that as we look forward to the future, within BCNU, the Indigenous Leadership Circle, we're committed to strengthening the presence and influence of Indigenous nurses within the healthcare system. The goal is to create an environment where Indigenous nurses are supported, respected, and empowered to lead. A key focus is on developing mentorship and educational opportunities that honor Indigenous knowledge and cultural practices. Ensuring fair and equitable working conditions is essential. The work is a collaboration. We were successful in bringing language into our last collective agreement that does elevate the Indigenous nurse within our profession. We seek to build strong relationships with educational institutions, government bodies, and community organizations to integrate Indigenous perspectives into healthcare policies and practices. By working together, we can create a healthcare system that is inclusive and responsive to the needs of Indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you to each of you. I'm going to have a question for you. that I hope each of you might spend a few minutes thinking about. But we have heard, and we're reminded, thank you, Don, that we stand on the shoulders of Indigenous nurses, and we owe it to them, those who have gone before us, to do the real hard action. Thank you for reminding us of that. Alika, you always remind us that change is a process. And so to think about that we're not going to finish it today, but we are going to work through that process because there is a crisis that we need to shift, and change is the way through. Thank you for that. Carrie, Indigenous Maori nurses are always at the front of change. We can't do it without our nurses. Thank you for reminding us that rights are at risk in other parts of the world. And we owe it also to share our support to Maori who are fighting a large fight. And Candy, wow, Indigenous nurse leadership. This is the call. This is what keeps us moving forward and maintains that momentum for change and for reconciliation. Thank you. I have one question for you, because I understand that the fire keepers are waiting for you over break, and so we owe it to them to be almost on time. I have one question to you, and to please just use your mics at the podium here. If you had one or two sentences that you wanted to share to Indigenous nurses here in the room and to the hundreds who are watching online, what would be that one piece of advice you'd give to Indigenous nurses in this time in healthcare? Can I, Alika, anybody want to go first?
I think I would say to Indigenous nurses that there is a space for you in healthcare. There is a space for you to bring your cultural knowledge, all of what you have learned since you were your little baby in a bonnet. There is a space for you within nursing. Because we are a minority right now, the space is held dear, it's cherished, and it's very necessary for you to also look behind you to the ones that are coming after you and just do your tiny little bit to make their steps slightly easier to navigate. And don't forget, you're not alone. There's many of you out there.
I think there's two things. We need to be brave and imaginative, because being brave is that deep breath that you take before you go and do something different. And imagination is what is needed to create the change that we need to see. This is about building what we call whakapapa. This is about continuing the journey of our people. If we can't rely on other people to do it for us, our genealogy, our whakapapa is too important to leave in the hands of others. So we've got to have courage to get through and to protect what is ours.
Be proud. Be proud and celebrate. Celebrate each other. It is, there is not many of us in these environments, and when we find each other, come together and be proud and celebrate and show that celebration to our communities so we can help bring the young ones back up into this profession as well.
Maybe a suggestion to non-Indigenous nurses, and then some suggestions to Indigenous nurse colleagues. Just like Rose's title of her book, "Ally is a Verb," folks in this room you gotta own your power. Okay, you are what changes, right? We often think of change as like out there. It's you changing, right? It's me changing. If you're in a bad situation at work where you get in conflict with colleagues, we all have to change, and it's the same thing with the change that we're talking about here today. For Indigenous nursing colleagues, what I really recommend is to remember two things, and this is just stuff that might apply from physicians. The first is that you got to get concrete about what you want. We have very abstract concepts like racism, discrimination, etc. There are very specific things that are happening in your workplaces that are unique to you. Get really clear about what you want. Because if you don't get clear, it's hard for people to help, right? People can own their power, but if they don't know what to do, it's going to be tough. The second is that remember any change is a value exchange. So if you have a problem that needs to get solved and that problem gets solved, make sure that you actually get closer to the people that are helping you. Make sure that you celebrate what they do as well. I know that with change that we talked about with the CMA apology, there's lines that you have to stay on. I don't suggest pandering. I don't think pandering's like a good thing. But if people honestly are trying to change, make sure you celebrate them because that's what feeds the positive cycles of change that we're really looking for. And I think you guys are on a good path, so congratulations.
Can I get your thank you? Can we please give a hand to the panel? What an amazing amount of information. Thank you. Kendall?